This is I Have No Title and I Must Podcast, the show where we discuss any and all aspects of pop culture that is on our mind. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
And before we get into the episode, for anyone still curious about the Venture Brothers movie, Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart, and you still haven't checked that out yet, a little hesitant to pick up a physical copy, it is now on streaming on Max, along with, if I'm not mistaken, the entire series as a whole. So you can get caught up on that if you haven't already, and then enjoy the movie. But today, we've discussed before how we really enjoy practical effects, and here lately, I've been picking up some old hobbies, which is like model making and just that kind of stuff, related, similar. So it's been on my mind. Chris, did you ever watch a show or remember a show? This would have been early 90s, maybe mid 90s, called Movie Magic.
I think I've seen bits and pieces here and there.
I think that show is what kind of kickstarted my love for practical movie effects, because I'd watch that show with my parents, and it just blew my mind how they actually did stuff in movies. Because for anyone that's not seen the show, I don't know where you would watch it now. I don't think anywhere has it, because most of this information is just like YouTube now. Mm-hmm. But I had forgotten about this show for a while, and I don't know, it just popped in my head the other night. But this show would just show you the ways they did different practical effects and different scenes in movies. And so, I don't know, it just kind of kickstarted it. So I wanted to watch all these movies, because I don't want to, put anyone down that works on CG or uses CG, because I'm sure those people work very hard to do what they do. But to me, when you use the practical effects, it's just like, man, that's so clever workaround, like how you actually do that. Because again, it is almost like a magic trick. It's like, what you're seeing isn't what's actually there, but the fact that someone came up with this little workaround to make you believe that, which is always fascinating to me. And so that's kind of where I pick my hobbies up at. Let's make models. Let's build these props.
When I was a kid, 80s and 90s, it was more prevalent to have, when a movie came out, part of the promotion, maybe after it was out, maybe even before, which would sometimes kind of tip too much of the movie, but that's beside the point. They would put out the making of this movie, and it would just be on TV, like ABC or NBC or something, like middle of the week. And I love those shows. I remember watching, I'm pretty sure there was one for Back to the Future 2 and 3, because I remember seeing a lot of stuff for that. Terminator 2, something about, I want to say The Abyss. There was because I think that was some of the first, like, notable CGI that was getting attention. I know, Tron. Not going to ignore Tron, but The Abyss it got a lot more acclaim for that. Kind of stole Tron's thunder, I guess. So that's what started my love for movie making in general, because back then there wasn't CGI to speak of, really, or if there was, it was such a tiny part that was a niche thing. It's like, oh my god, and they're making use of computers now? What even are computers? And then they would talk about that, but then they go right back to all of this, either stunts or the trick photography, or just your basic special effects, practical effects, of which there were, a lot of those, most of the movies then, that wasn't discussing the disambiguation from regular effects to CG effects wasn't even a thing, because it was like, well, you get this much for this sort of thing. Or you would have a Michael Jackson video where people's faces morph into other faces. And that is a CGI effect, but not in the way we think of it these days. That would be so cheaply done now. You could probably buy an app and make it do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would eventually come to have my favorite directors and then people who would, go out of their way to, sometimes even Michel Gondry makes his own. He's in with the crew, sometimes cutting up cardboard with them.
It's like you said, like using the app, that's a really great tool, especially if you're an aspiring filmmaker and you don't have a lot of money. You just get this app, you do the effect, and then you got it in your movie. But again, if you have the opportunity to use practical effects, because like the mystery's not there for me with CGI. It's like, oh, how'd you do this? Oh, well, we had this computer and it did this. Yeah, there might be some cleverness in there and programs that you use, but for the most part, the answer is always the same. Oh, we used a computer, we programmed it to do this, and then we put it in here.
Yeah.
But with the practical effect, it's like, especially when you look back at like these old like Charlie Chaplin films and stuff like that, like how they use like forced perspective and like rear projections and paintings and stuff.
Yeah, they. I think that skating scene
Yeah.
in I can't remember if that was City Lights, but it's on. It's easy to find. Just I'm sure you could type in Charlie Chaplin skating. It's in like a department store after hours. And him and some other homeless bozos, sorry, are just milling about, and he's having fun skating, and it looks like he's almost gonna take a spill over an edge into the lower floor. He keeps getting like closer and closer. He's actually just on a regular floor, and they use that forced perspective to make the portion that he would fall into that's just right up on the camera. That's one of the greatest effects, not that specific one, but the concept, because you could still use that today, and if you do it just right, nobody even knows.
Yeah.
It works so seamlessly, which even on the original Star Wars, a lot of those models, of course, when I say seamless, depends. Some of them do. If it's a moving model and you're using green screen or some other matte painting backdrop, it can have a seam. But that's where CGI can actually come in and help, is just clean up the process of having made something real.
Yeah.
That's just part of the specialized editions. We're just cleaning up things that it wasn't replacing something. It was just like cleaning up a seam on a green screen that they couldn't have done in 77. So that's knowing when to use those applications for good instead of ill, instead of relying too much on it as a crutch. I just hate to see these fall into obscurity.
Yeah.
These tools and these effects.
Because especially looking back at Star Wars before they digitally touched it up, some of it makes sense. I'm not going to say all of Lucas's tinkering with Star Wars was a bad thing, but I don't know, just the practical like models and stuff that Phil Tippett and the rest of the crew put so much time into. That Rancor still looks real.
Yeah.
Like it still holds up even all these years later because it was real. Like I think that's with a lot of these movies. Like some of it looks cheesy, just like you have with your CG, but even some of the cheesier things still look better than bad CG and holds up a lot better.
Yeah. What's your least favorite addition to the specialized version of Star Wars? Because I know what mine is. And it's a lot of people can say, oh, they took Boba Fett's voice out. There's a glaring one. There's one that just screams right up in your face. Some of the dialogue got changed with Darth Vader, and they took out that god-awful looking Emperor and put Ian McDiarmid in.
Yeah.
That's continuity. Putting in Tamora, Morrison? Is that the new Boba Fett? The current Boba Fett? Is that his name?
Yeah, maybe.
Putting his voice in, it's more continuity stuff. It makes it feel like it flowed. But Max Rebo's new song in Return of the Jedi, what the was that? And that was just to show off because they added in a new completely CGI character to like get right up in, or a couple maybe.
Oh, they had a lot more.
Yeah.
I don't know, minor, like the CG Jabba the Hutt and the
A New Hope.
Yeah. And like Vader's Force Ghost at the end of Jedi. I get kind of continuity thing. You want to put Hayden Christensen in there. But at the same time, that was like 20 years. Like he's not going to look like that. Like, are we just saying like, oh, he's going back to his prime, but Obi-Wan and Yoda didn't?
I'm not going to fight you on this because that'll just be the next 40 minutes. But anyway, there's a lot to dissect there, but I was trying to think of another good example of the Rock in it was at the Scorpion King movie. An example of terrible CGI, and not necessarily the other things we're talking about are decisions made with sometimes CGI is good. That one of the versions of the Jabba the Hutt in A New Hope was bad. I've seen the original version too, where it's just a guy walking up. But The Rock, they clearly, it looks like what the Nintendo Switch does now to make real people, whereas like the other systems, I just saw this thing about Mortal Kombat, whereas like all these new Mortal Kombat games look like pristine and like just kind of oily people. And then the new Nintendo Switch version had to like downgrade everything, but it's still the same price. And it looks like The Rock from The Scorpion King or whatever that movie was. Or was it The Scorpion King or was it one of the Mummy movies?
It was the second Mummy movie.
Okay.
But he was portraying the Scorpion King.
Right. Okay. Was the subtitle Scorpion King?
It might have been.
I really can't remember. It's been so
Or
long.
was it just The Mummy Returns?
I think that was the second one.
Yeah.
But that was one where, like, just make a practical effect. A practical effect would have been so much better. I know it would have been prosthetics.
Yeah,
it would have been a giant thing you set him into.
I think the reason they didn't, and so even though it is bad, I can't fault them too much because I don't think it was fully in their control. Because I think there's some kind of scheduling conflict because The Rock hadn't fully left wrestling yet at this time. So I don't think they could actually get him to come in and be there when they were doing these scenes. So I guess someone's just like, yeah, I remember what he looks like, and then put it in a computer program.
I can fault them for that. And I have a solution. Get Roddy Piper and call it a day. That motherfucker would have shown up. He would have shown up in a kilt and he would have said, "What are we doing?" And he would have done it. And it would have been amazing.
Because he's there to chew bubble gum and kick ass.
Yeah.
And he's all out of bubble gum.
Yeah. When you run out of bubble gum, you know what to do. So, proceed.
Where am I going from here?
I don't know. Have you seen many of Michel Gondry's works? They're the most famous one that American audiences want, because he has some films that are just French films.
I was going to say, like, outside of his music videos, I'm not.
You've seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, haven't you?
No, I've actually not seen that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. We should actually just what? That's probably the most famous of his
That's the one
American
with
films. Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's awesome. I mean, it is, the older I get, the more, when I was younger, I used to be able to watch sad or what people would call depressing movies. I used to get mad at people saying that. And I would just be able to watch it, feel the emotions in it, and bounce back and say, you know, what other friends of mine would say, I don't want to watch that. It's sad or it's depressing. I'm like, but that's the drama of it. You have to experience these things. And it's just such a good piece of cinema. As I get older, I crave more comedy and I crave more lighthearted. That's why I still haven't watched Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. It's not because I don't want to see the movie or because I think it's a bad movie. I think everyone agrees it's a great film. And I lie about having seen it to some people to get out of this conversation, but I will share it here now. It's difficult sometimes. That is, you know, when you experience a certain level of events in your life, you don't seek out tragedy to fill your head up with on a daily basis, especially after the pandemic, especially after some health issues I've had. So it's on my list. I'm not saying I'm never gonna watch that film. I probably have at some point said that. It's not like I really mean that. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is one that is very. Some people might feel conflicted about it. It's got a lot of emotion in it, but the artistry and also the use of practical effects in this film, you could teach a class on practical effects just from this film. I might be late on the punch to that. There may already be a class being taught on the use of practical effects in this film. Michel Gondry, the French director, the other big one American audiences would know and hate is The Green Hornet, which most people probably don't even remember that film. I watched it because me and my dad watched the old Green Hornet show that was like being made parallel with the 60s Batman with Adam West, and they even had a crossover episode. It was a bit more serious than the Adam West show, but it was the same basic format as a mystery or crime of the week. Guys would get in costume, go out and solve the crime. Like I said, it was a little bit more serious adult martial arts oriented because Bruce Lee.
Early Bruce Lee.
Yeah. So a little bit less fun than the 60s Batman, but still pretty cool. So my dad was a big Green Hornet fan, so went to go see this, and it wasn't great. And I was disappointed with Michel Gondry, but there was still a lot of good practical effects in it. It was still okay. My favorite of his films is The Science of Sleep, and all of his films make use of sometimes it's like childlike whimsy, this a weird use of practical effects, where it's like it's kind of in your face that you are looking at a practical effect, but I think there's something charming about that. You don't go into Fantastic Mr. Fox and think like, oh my god, are these real foxes or are they puppets? You know, it's stop motion. Sometimes he blends the two worlds of stop motion, and you know it's stop motion, and real life to create this kind of dreamlike surrealism that is I'm not going to say unique to him, but the way that he does it is unique to him. And that is why he's one of my favorite directors. It is because he creates an aesthetic similar to like what Wes Anderson does with just aesthetics, colors and color grading, and the wardrobe and the sets he uses. Michel does this with his practical effects, the specific types of things he chooses to use for practical effects, that it won't look real, but it will look interesting. Anyway, we need to privately, off air, or do a commentary on some of these, because I'd love to get your like it'll be my millionth reaction to some of these movies. I'd love to get one where it's your first reaction. I hate those first reaction videos, but that if we looked at this as just an experiment.
It's like I'd lock the music video for Hardest Button to Button, if that helps.
Yeah, I actually hate that song. I'm a huge Jack White fan, but I've always hated that song. And then that was one of, but he did quite a few for Jack. I was going to say that a friend of the show, Chase Burdett, is going to be filming a music video soon. And I was like, why do you need a specific space? He was talking about trying to find a space. And I thought he was just looking for an interesting area. He's really just looking for a place where he can use like projection onto them. And he didn't want to tell me too much about it because it's story oriented. So I don't want to tip too much of his the planning for this. But then I was like, I was going to use that idea in one of my short films I had planned. Not that I came up with it, that Michel Gondry used it in, I think it was Dead Leaves on the Dirty Ground, the music video. And it's been used dozens of times by filmmakers and in music videos and film. But I like the way he thinks, and that's why we get on so well. He's got good taste.
So outside of those movies, what is your favorite use of a practical effect?
That's interesting. You know what? I'm going to start with the other, because I've mentioned Star Wars, but I've had Star Wars on my mind lately because we've been watching Ahsoka, and I feel I will say I feel conflicted, because it has its pros and cons, about one thing that I always would have said the way they should go, but it's the lightsabers, the new lightsabers that they can actually use, like the prop replica type lightsabers where they light up. Before last week's episode of Ahsoka with the return of Hayden Christensen, I would have said I don't think they should ever use those, because it looks cool, like with the Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader from that dark planet they were on at the end of the Obi-Wan show. You can see the light emitting, it's like flashing in their face. It's on the ground. From a distance, you can even see it looks like two video game characters with the sphere around them, showing you which one is your player. And I thought it looked cool. It looked more real than it ever had before, because it's practical. It's shining in their face. It's not added in post. Maybe it's enhanced. I don't know. But if they're using those real lights, some people said it feels like they're hitting each other with lighted up sticks. They are. That is 100% what they're doing. But can they hit hard enough? Because, my favorite sword fight is Obi-Wan versus Anakin from episode 3. They go hard. I don't know what those things are made of, because they break them. They hit them so hard they break. You can see that in the practice shots. So with these, they cannot break them. They can, but they're probably trying not to. And I doubt that they're made of something indestructible. So it worked this time. The Anakin versus Ahsoka worked. He went hard, and it felt like it. Before this, I felt like Rosario Dawson, it feels like she's holding back a lot of times, and I want to see like that lightning fast action. Maybe you could argue it's a different style, but it all comes down to the effect that they use for the prop. Could they use some aluminum stick and add it later, and would it look just as good? It wouldn't look as real, but then again, these aren't real. These aren't meant to be real things. So I feel conflicted about that still. But when Anakin came back, He goes hard, and it looks good. Their fight looks good, I feel. And he's so fast. And that's what I feel had been missing. But maybe that's just unique to his character, and that's what they want to maintain that. Do you have a specific, because like favorite practical effect of all time? That's really hard. I think about like music videos I get absorbed in. Like I love watching Bjork's music videos. She's one that I think of, and I'm like, the is even happening? Yeah. Or the White Stripes.
So yeah, I think the obvious pick is everything that's not CG in Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Because they use practical effect on top of practical effect on top of practical effect for all those future destruction scenes. It's like we've got this layer of practical effect projected onto this one, and just like even with their CG, there's mix of practical effects. Because on one of Cinefix's recent videos, they were kind of doing a deep dive into that movie, and it's talking about like just the eye that James Cameron has. Because the one scene where Arnold Schwarzenegger shoots Robert Patrick's character and his head like explodes open into that metal, there's just like a split second that is this weird actual physical head that blows open that cuts to CG. And it's like a blink and you miss it thing there. But it's just like if it wasn't there, you wouldn't believe the CG.
Yeah.
And I just think that's just amazing of the planning that goes into that, just even that, and like where the cuts are and all that. But yeah, if you want a more in-depth dive, go watch their video because they'll probably do a better job than I will here.
And that's Cinefix.
Yeah.
Cinefix, great channel.
Yeah, they're doing like their top 100 movies, and each episode is just like a deep dive into one of those movies. But one of the ones they've done in the past few weeks has been Terminator 2, and they're going through the different effects and their favorite parts. But yeah, go check that out for a deeper dive.
One that comes to mind, there's a lot that come to mind. It's really hard to pin down a favorite. I could make a top 10. Sitting here thinking about it. So a couple years ago was a huge anniversary for Citizen Kane, which I had not seen, but further back than that, I was like, I kept saying, all right, this is the year I'm going to watch it or something. And then I kept putting it off. Not that you've put off watching a film, but anyway, that's just the way my mind works. And I remain so busy all the time and scatterbrained that whenever I go to do something, it turns out it's 6 months later. And I'm like, when did I do that? That's right, I didn't. So I found out it was going to be shown in theaters that I want to say November. Could have been October. So me and Allison went, and I had seen things about it. I tried not to over the years. I mean, it's hard not to find out about one of the most famous films ever made, what is still lauded as one of the greatest films ever made. It's not a practical effects heavy film, but there are a few things. One most notable in my mind is there's this, it's a scene, it's like an auditorium scene or something, but it's shown from way back. I'm pretty sure that's what this was. It's like a still frame. It's like a photograph, basically. But to add motion, they poked holes in it, they backlit it, and they put slits of what I think, this is from memory, from having seen something about this, like slits of black paper all across so that they would move in different ways to like on the backside that would block the light coming in and out to create the sense of motion that like people are moving around. And even knowing that when I went into the theater, there is this sense of it's going to look of its time. It doesn't. It looks good. They were geniuses to come up with this, especially at the time, and to take those wild swings to do something. They didn't necessarily even need the shot, but they wanted it. It probably could have saved like dozens of hours of work and time if they just cut that shot and have some other connector segue. But he wanted it in there, and that's one of the reasons why it's so well remembered is by people like us, is because you don't just watch a film, you want to know about the film. You want to know about the making of it, the writing of it, the thought process behind it. And given that, people who care about the process and the making of the film will create a better work of art, especially when it requires so many people and so much time and effort. That is one that stands out to me. There's a lot from, like Harold Lloyd from the silent era, and Charlie Chaplin didn't use as much. He did use some. I think Buster Keaton he did a lot more stunt work.
Yeah.
And I think they had to pre-prepare for, which that's kind of dips into a different realm, pre-preparing for a certain stunt and setting up something. But it almost works as a practical effect when you think like that would have been trick photography or something. And it's like, well, but they really did it.
Yeah.
It's real. It just looks fake because your brain almost can't accept that. Did he really miss that building falling on him by inches? Yeah, because they planned it out so carefully.
Something that I was actually surprised was a practical effect. Probably not in the newer ones, but in the old 007 movies. All of their introduction music videos was like all practical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, because I always wondered, like, how they do that. And yeah, it's just different projections and lightings and stuff
Also,
like that.
that tarantula that was crawling across Sean Connery's chest, that wasn't really even there. So there was just somebody with a little straw blowing on his chest hair, creating the illusion that there was a giant furry 8-legged arachnid. Yeah, go back and watch that. It's just Sean Connery's hair. It's just a trick of the light.
And now that's what Sean Connery's going to be remembered for.
Yeah.
His moving chest hair.
Well, and that one red leotard outfit.
Oh.
What? Well, I know what I'm going to be photoshopping on you later.
Oh, God. It's like, I don't know how to not just start listing out.
Yeah, I want to just do that and
Yeah.
just say, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and
The black and white to color transition in The Wizard of Oz.
yeah. Or people are still talking about the tornado. I saw a video the other day. It was like, how did they do this? I'm like, wow, are films just not using any practical effects that we have to go back to like 37?
Well, to be fair, I think that was the first time they had a moving tornado on film.
No, I'm not taking anything. I love The Wizard of Oz. L. Frank Baum produced his own short film versions of them that were prior to that, all in black and white, really cheaply made. I've read all of the first run of his books. Huge Wizard of Oz fan. So my thing is it, and go back, dissect it, please. But it just surprised me that it was just some random guy and did this thing. And I thought, everything's CGI now. Almost everything is, and not to, again, it's on my mind because we're still in the middle of Ahsoka. I thought that the next episode might be a wrap on Ahsoka and discussing the latter half of the season. But due to our schedule, not knowing how many episodes there are, because I'm scared to look for spoilers, and also not our scheduling conflicts, the volume that they use, which it could be an amazing tool, but I think it has to be used sparingly or just the right way. Because it's been pointed out, it didn't really bother me. It's not like it took me out of it until it's pointed out to me that like when you film, especially say against just like what is a green screen versus if you're in a real forest, that can be a jarring difference. There are definitely pros to using. I'm not saying you should never use CGI. It does things and can enhance things. Like when you talk about like the T-1000, there are things that the practical effects could do that they just couldn't do with the CGI at the time. And there were things that the CGI could do that the practical effects could never do at the time. Like making him look like real, like mercury, like liquid metal.
Walking through that chain link fence.
Yeah. And just the layers when he first comes out of that fire after like the big truck accident. And I think he's basically in like underwear.
Oh, yeah.
If you've seen the behind the scenes. And, he has all these lines drawn on him because that's how they did it back then. Get him smooth until finally he looks like the Silver Surfer with all these layered effects. And then get him to look, back to the Agent Doggett.
Could you imagine being like just somebody walking past the film set? Just see Robert Patrick running around in his underwear?
I can't imagine that. I imagine that every day. Every time I walk by a fence, I look through it and think, what if Robert Patrick was just on the other side in his underwear and could walk through this fence? He's a guy that looked old when he was young. So it was jarring for me to have seen him on the X-Files. And then it was probably makeup or prosthetics or something, but he aged quickly after a certain point. Some people who do that, it's like you look old when you're young, and then all of a sudden at some point you take a leap forward, or maybe something happened and I didn't know. But like in Walk the Line, he looked much older. But then again, him and Joaquin Phoenix are probably like not too far off in age. It could be 20 years. But, he's playing his dad in that. So, or it should be 30 years, and I look like a idiot. I'm not looking it up. And I'm not saying look it up for me and post it in the comments. And if we've been mispronouncing everyone's names, I guess you'll just have to correct us.
It's probably accurate. I'm doing everything from memory today.
Yeah, that's... I looked up just a couple things, and then I didn't say any of them.
I don't know. Say these last 2 episodes have been experiments. Because we had no idea what it was going to be.
I think the Ahsoka one went okay, as we were both caught up on it and had just recently watched that. I think that one went okay. I think this one's going okay.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. What do you think? We'll wrap up here before we just list off every movie we've ever seen.
Yeah, because that's where I would go into. I would start. Oh, I do. Wes Anderson does use... I just want to say he uses stop motion, which I think is always a great practical effect. It's rarely enhanced with CGI. There probably is some for Coraline where it does deal with some supernatural things and for some lighting effects and stuff. But every time you're dealing with any kind of stop motion, that is a practical effect. And I love that, even when it glaringly calls attention to itself, because you've put love, time, and effort into it. And Wes Anderson, has used some stop motion practical effects to do some of his action scenes in live action films. It adds to the whimsy of what he's doing. So other than to make that be the last of anything I list, that the ski chase from the Grand Budapest comes to mind.
I think he does use a little bit of digital for color grading, but I think that's sparingly.
Yeah. And that's generally across the board.
Yeah. Which I'm okay with.
Yeah.
Because, again, I don't hate CG. It's got its place. I think if you can do it practically, it stands out better usually.
Yeah, if you have it's reversing. Initially it cost so much to do CGI, and now it takes more time and effort to hire people, if you can't do it yourself, to build the prop and do that.
Yeah.
Whereas, you can just borderline slave labor some CGI people into making into the Spider-Verse movie. You don't have to pay them or feed them or anything. So it's getting to the point where it's the opposite is true. Just like, 200 years ago, everyone had a horse, and when cars came around, it was only for the elite and the rich. And now it is the opposite. Everyone has a car, and only the elite and rich own horses. So it's strange how things turn like that. If you have the time and can some practical effects like this for a special effect or a certain kind of scene don't necessarily need to be expensive. It can be very cheap. You just have to put in the effort, and sometimes it can be time consuming and money consuming. You just have to figure out your way around it and what would fit your aesthetic for your film. If you're gonna make like hard sci-fi film, maybe you do need some CGI in there. Just don't forget to add in something that makes it you.
One more thing I will add that I didn't think about until just now is, do you think it is actually our cameras that we use now that makes it harder for practical effect?
Because they pick up so much.
Yes.
There's so much detail.
So you have to be more detailed.
Yes, they're less forgiving.
Yeah.
Back then, you could get away with more because of that, I think. And then it's also that if you're using a digital camera, too, if you were to use film and there was some natural grain that your eye could accept, that helps. So, but again, it's more expensive to use film now. So these are all things to be taken into consideration when doing that. That's a whole different debate, getting into who should be doing that and who shouldn't. If you can incorporate some natural effects, I say do it, but that's because I love it so much. But if you want to make a crappy film that I'm not going to watch, then yeah, go for it. Go wild with CGI.
But yeah, I think we'll end here before we start rambling more than we already are. But if you made it with us this far, thank you. Be sure to follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. We're getting ready to go into spooky season. Got a little bit of special stuff planned for that, so definitely keep an eye out. Special thanks to Chase. We'll leave links for him. And until next time, see ya.